Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just continued our freshman lookout of all the impact freshmen for all of the conference contenders. Just got into the Big 12. We'll do the ACC tomorrow to wrap up that segment. But let's get into Monday questions and let's talk about the Texas Longhorns because I have a ton going into the season. There's no two ways about that. They might be one of the most interesting teams going into this season, and one of the biggest questions is very, very specific, but it has so much to do with what Texas can be this upcoming year. How is Quinn Ewers deep ball? That is the big time question mark around pretty much every Texas fan's head right about now because there were a ton of missed opportunities down the field for Texas a year ago. Quinn Ewers is a fantastic quarterback, and anything between 10 and 20 yards, or anything 20 yards and in, is money. There's no two ways about that. There are very few quarterbacks in the country that are better than him when it's 20 yards and in. Beyond that, it gets a little bit sketchy, and he missed a ton of big time opportunities and opportunities that could make these really close games that you've seen from Texas over the last couple of years a little bit wider and definitely make them a little bit more comfortable of wins. And the Texas wide receiving core is going to be fast. They're not only fast, they're stupid fast. It's just insane the amount of guys they have that can just go on that offense. But at the end of the day, you got to be able to hit them. And that's the big time question mark for Quinn Ewers. One of the things that I've seen over the offseason, I believe it was Daniel Jeremiah that was breaking him down, and he was scouting him and said his deep ball is one of the prettiest balls in all of the country. He just puts too much air under it. He just allows these really speedy wide receivers that you want to put a little bit air under it and let them run under the ball, but you can't just float the ball up there and then it looks like a sitting duck. I don't know if anyone saw that TCU throw that got picked off that was remarkably saved by Jordan Whittington, but that was a bad ball, and that was the epitome of what Daniel Jeremiah was talking about right there, and that's the difference this year. If he opens that up, if he hits that ball consistently, he has Heisman written all over him. I'll be totally honest with you. There are very few passes that this guy can't make. If he makes the deep ball passes, it's just going to be almost game over for every defense that faces Texas this upcoming year. And then watching him, the biggest thing is just the timing of the footwork. There's a lot of things where it's all arm and not a lot of feet going into it, not a lot of the lower body going into the throw. And if he can time that up, it's going to be a very beautiful ball. There are a couple of balls from a year ago. There was another one against TCU where he hit Xavier Worthy. I think it was his best ball he's thrown at Texas. It was just absolutely incredible the way he threaded that ball in there. And I think it's one of those things where he just needs to go out there and trust his arm. He needs to do everything on time. He needs to do everything in rhythm. And if he does that, he's going to be more than fine. So if he takes a step forward, Texas offense will take that little step forward. If he takes a big step forward, they could be outright unstoppable on the offensive side of the ball, and Quinn Ewers could be lifting a Heisman Trophy and a national trophy at the end of the year. So it'll be very interesting to watch that, but that might be one of the biggest things. And to go with that, how do the wide receivers pan out? They brought in some big-time transfers and some really good transfers, but how do they fit into this offense? Do they fit in the way that everyone is hoping they will, and can they make the plays that you need them to make? Because you lost some really good guys from a year ago. Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, Jordan Whittington we just talked about, Jatavian Sanders as well. All those guys are out the door. And you added Isaiah Bond, who is going to be the marquee name. He's the headliner. He's the guy that's going to be on all the quarterback wide receiver duo rankings that you'll see as the season starts to come up. And he's the one that will likely be the highest draft pick at the end of the year. But the other two guys are really, really good as well. Matthew Golden is someone that I think is going to be a huge target for this team. I think he's kind of the glue guy, for lack of a better term. I think where some of these other guys might not necessarily fit the mold as well, being speed type receivers, Matthew Golden does. I think he's going to be huge for this team just to keep the chains moving. Third down type guy, that big body that can make really any play on the field. So a very, very important guy for them. And then the one that I think is going to turn the most heads, the one that I think is going to make the most noise is Silas Bolden. I think this guy is just absolutely insane. He showed up on campus probably about 2.5, 3 weeks ago at this point, and people already love him. They already think he's going to be one of the biggest players on this team, and he's a much more polished route runner than a lot of people thought he was going to be coming in. They compared him to Xavier Worthy in that respect, which is very high praise. But at the end of the day, he's going to be hugely important, and I think he's someone that Sark is just going to love. You can line him up all over the field. You can use him all types of ways. And once you get the ball in his hands, he's a very, very special athlete. So I think he's going to be hugely important. They absolutely need these guys to step up. They need these guys to hit. I think as long as two of the three hit, they'll be more than fine. But frankly, it looks like all three of them are going to be fantastic players. And on top of that, you have a slew of young guys that I think are going to be great, including Jonte Cook, DeAndre Moore, a ton of others. But at the end of the day, there's going to be a ton on these three transfer receivers. And if they come together, I think this could be, again, just a ridiculous offense in so many different ways. And then another big question mark, those D linemen. How do you replace Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat? Because that was the difference maker a year ago. That was the reason that Texas won as many games as they did, and that's the reason they had one of the best seasons they've had in quite some time, were the two guys up front. They were hugely important, and they dominated defensive lines or offensive lines pretty much every single week of the season. The OU and Washington games were a little bit tough at times, but for the most part, the line of scrimmage just absolutely belonged to Texas throughout last year. And frankly, they have the guys this year. I think Alfred Collins is going to be a really good player. He's uber athletic, someone that absolutely has just been kind of missing the mark just slightly over his time throughout Texas. Has made a couple of plays here and there, but if he is on the field consistently, I think he's going to be a big-time player. And then Vernon Broughton is someone that I think is going to be huge in terms of a run-stopping threat, someone that can really open a lot of doors, just being a space eater more than anything else. And then they gotten some big-time transfers that will absolutely play a huge role. And it starts with Bill Norton. I think he's going to be the starter at nose tackle for this team, and it's because of just how darn big he is. He is a huge player that absolutely is fantastic against the run. Arizona had one of the best run defenses in the country, and he was a huge part of that. Jermaine Lole is also another huge-time player they stole from OU late in that transfer portal cycle. They also got Tia Savea, so another transfer from Arizona. So huge players just coming in on that D-line to add to guys like Sadir Mitchell and Jare Bledsoe that are the younger guys that absolutely make some noise. So you brought in Kenny Baker from the NFL ranks. He is a hugely important guy. The recruiting has started off slow. It started off a little bit tough for him, but at the end of the day, if these guys perform this upcoming season, it'll fix itself very quickly. I can promise you that. And he came here for development. That's why he was hired by Steve Sarkisian. And if he can do that, then no problem. They'll be more than fine on the defensive line, and then the recruits will start to roll in. So I think this is going to be a huge year for Texas on that line of scrimmage, because if they miss this year and get dominated, it's going to be really hard to recover recruiting-wise because of having an NFL guy at that position. But if they can perform and do what they did a year ago, or at least 75% of what they did a year ago, I think they'll be more than fine going forward at that position. And then what's the biggest threat to Texas as they move into the SEC this upcoming year? Because everyone's talking about all the hurdles, and the one thing that I've heard a million times is the physicality. Texas can't handle the physicality of the SEC, and I totally do agree that there is going to be a learning curve by no stretch of the imagination. There's going to be a little bit of a learning curve, understanding that some of these games that would have been a little bit easier in the Big 12, at least on your body, are going to be a little bit harder to recover from and to get up for the next week. So I do think that is a real reality, but if you want to go look at the average weight and height of the O-line and D-line at Texas, be my guest, but they have the dudes. There's no two ways about that. If you wanted to go body for body in the SEC and did just entire rosters against each other, Texas would rank very, very high. The physicality is not necessarily going to be an issue, at least on paper. There could be some things that break down throughout the season that make it a little bit tougher, but I do think they're going to be more than fine, really, at the physicality perspective. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to have problems. And the biggest worry that I have is there's this philosophy over at Texas, this moniker that I'm sure you've heard around Texas, all gas, no brakes. And it's something that Steve Sarkisian brought in and he's kind of kept throughout his time. That has not been the way he's called plays in some of his games. I'll be totally honest. He starts just pedal to the metal. He starts really, really fast, has a beautiful designed 15 plays, does an incredible job getting his team on the board early. And then he just kind of sits on that lead. He gets up by 10, 14 points and says, okay, if we can stay up by 10 or 14 points, we're walking out of here with a win. that cannot be the way that he calls plays this year, because if it is, you're going to lose those games. I'm just being totally honest with you. That Kansas State game was very, very close, and it did not have to be in a lot of respects. There were some play calling things that happened throughout that game that just didn't need to happen, whether it was in the second or third quarter or just portions of different quarters where they just go stagnant, and it makes absolutely no sense. But at the end of the day, when you're playing all these incredible offenses and when you're attacking teams like Georgia and teams even like Oklahoma and some of the other teams that they're going to have to face, you don't have the ability to take your foot off the gas. You don't have the ability to say, okay, we have a good, 2-possession lead. Let's just start to run the ball more often, run the clock. You can't do that unless, it's the fourth quarter and late in the fourth quarter. Then I'm more than fine with that. But Steve Sarkisian would start doing it in like early third quarter or late second quarter, and it would cause so many problems down the stretch where their offense just wasn't good in a lot of stretches of last season. So this is one of those things that can be fixed. There's no two ways about that. And Steve Sarkisian, I think, understands that it's something that has to be fixed. But you can't have games that go down to the wire every single week in the SEC and expect to come out unscathed. You're going to get got a lot of those games, and you got to make sure that you hit on pretty much every single play. So when he comes out and has a beautiful 15-play drive and they score a touchdown, the next drive's got to be just as good, and the drive after that's got to be just as good. You won't be totally successful every single drive, but you got to be able to at least keep your foot on the gas and at least be executing the way that you execute as Texas. Don't get away from your game plan. Don't get timid or worried or worry about just keeping the lead. Go after it throughout the entire game, and if you don't, then I think there's a couple of more losses on here that we maybe don't see right now for Texas. So that was my biggest worry for Texas throughout all of last season and going into this season is if you take your foot off the gas, what happens? Because in the SEC, it could be a lot worse than what it was in the Big 12. But it'll be very interesting to see what the play calling looks like going into the season and how it kind of develops throughout. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We just have incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So definitely come over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. Today's the day that College Football 25 comes out, so at 4 p.m., I'm sure a lot of you will be loading that up just like me, so cannot wait for that. Might be back with a review tomorrow, honestly, but at the end of the day, thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.